Jag börjar.
Yes.
Ja, gött. Sveriges mest oregelbundna podcast AI-snack är tillbaka. Gött, Jonathan, Danny. Hur är läget?
Perfekt. Vilken morgon. Vilka gäster. Hur är det med dig?
Med mig? Jo, men med mig är det ju hur bra som helst. Det är, ja, men som du säger, vilka gäster. Och fredag lite mulet i maj. Ja, det är synd att klaga. Danny då?
Ja.
Hur står det till?
Ja, jag är lite extra glad idag för det är så många engelsmän i det här rummet då, så att ja, jag känner mig nästan som hemma faktiskt. Sen går jag runt och funderar jättemycket på vad sann AI vinner på reformationen eller vad det heter då. Men det är ett annat avsnitt.
Det är ett annat avsnitt,
ja.
Men nog så intressant. Så intressant. Bra marknadsföring om inte annat.
Ja, bra sätt att få en data också.
Men vi ska inte prata sanna AI utan vi ska prata AI och lärande. And hi to you, Leon, and hi to you, Neil.
Good morning.
Hey.
Good evening, Neil.
Good morning. We are so pleased to have you with us, and I will try to set the tone. I actually asked ChatGPT 3.5 raw, the model without system prompt, to write an introduction to you guys, and we'll play the game Spot the Hallucinations and see what has happened in 2 years. So, from ChatGPT 3.5 raw, this is the introduction to Leon Furze and Neil Selwyn. Good morning, everyone. Today I want to introduce you to Neil Selwyn and Leon Furze, two leading figures in the field of education and technology. Neil Selwyn, a professor of Monash University, and Leon Furze, a senior lecturer at the University of East London, have both made significant contributions to understanding how digital technology is shaping teaching and learning. Their research challenges traditional assumptions and offers new insights into how we can use digital tools to enhance educational practices. Together, they have co-authored influential papers and books that explore the social and cultural implications of technology in education. Neil Selwyn and Leon Furze are inspiring educators to continue to push the boundaries of our thinking in this important area. I encourage you to explore their work further to learn more about the impact of technology on education. Is this a truthful presentation about you two? Were there any hallucinations?
I taught in East London for a little while, back in 2004, but I don't think I've ever been a lecturer there as far as I'm aware.
Then you credit them. That means you're allowed to go down and do it. There's it.
Promoted me.
But still cool to have been part of the training data for ChatGPT 3.5. That says quite a lot still, that there were some correct answers from 3.5, wasn't there? But you both are based in Australia, but you're in Sweden right now, Neil. But do you guys know each other from before?
No. ChatGPT seemed to infer that we co-authored a book together. I've never actually met Leon before, so that's I think I've sent him an email once, but that doesn't really count as co-authoring.
Yeah, I think you gave me some very helpful advice right at the beginning of my PhD. That's probably the only time I've ever contacted you. It's probably enough in that email for a whole book, though. Why not?
Why not? Maybe you should, because for us, you are two inspiring people who with very poignant and good views on Gen AI and learning. And I think we'll start you off with an easy one. What's the purpose of school? Take it away, Neil. What's the purpose of school?
That's a really interesting question. At the moment, everyone talks about schools in terms of learning. So we have learners who are learning in learning environments, teachers are learning engineers, everything's based around learning, which is one aspect of school. I quite like the philosopher Geert Biester, who talks about the purposes of education. And he very much takes a spin on the fact that education and schooling is not just about kind of empty learning, and it's not just about kind of learning facts or developing learning skills in order to be a learner, but it's about lots of other things. So it's about developing young people to be kind of citizens and part of a community and part of a wider kind of collective. So there's a kind of socialization aspect to schools. He also talks about subjectification, allowing young people to work out who they are as a person and who they are as a person in relation to other people. And he also talks about schooling in terms of qualification, and that's giving people capacities to do something in the world. Teachers have a really important role in all of this. So for sure, schools are about learning, and you could argue they're about passing exams, but they're about so much more than that. And one of the other things that the AI debate also often kind of narrows the view of schooling, and when we talk about AI skills or AI competencies, when I started back in the 1980s, late 80s, early 90s, it was quite common to argue that schools are not about feeding a workforce to the economy, that schools are about a lot more than that. And actually, the workplace and work skills and businesses and firms, that's the place to develop skills for work, and schools are about everything else. So I would take a much more sort of broader view than often is talked about in the AI and the tech literature.
Yeah, because you'll get to answer Leon as well, but do you guys think that the answer to that question will also shape your view on AI in education? In what way?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll just pick up where Neil left off, and I was a secondary teacher in mostly in a regional school out here in Southwest Victoria for 15 years. And that comment about schools being about community more than about being a pipeline into future skills, I think, is really important. I think I was lucky to work in a school that wasn't really focused on senior school examinations and that pipeline into university. We had a lot of students who went to university, but it wasn't this like really dominant narrative. And the biggest thing that worries me about AI literacy, which is everybody's favorite new term at the moment, is that it's just another series of tick boxes for preparing students for this really abstract future. Like we've nailed down what the future looks like, and these are the skills. And we've done this. We've seen it before. 21st century skills and future skills and whatever you want to call them. But for me, school is much more about that sense of community, and working in that small regional school was great. I started in schools in Stoke-on-Trent in the UK and in London, which were big schools with not as much of a sense of community, frankly. And so my perspective was definitely shaped by my experience out here.
Do you think we could reach that we could elevate that narrative a bit more? Do you think that AI will put a focus more on that interpretation of the purpose of school, or is that a faint idea that will not happen and we'll still have the discourse that we have?
I think if you pour AI over the top of something, you'll sort of just accelerate what you've already got. So the question probably is like, what's the system that we already have, and are we just going to pour something on top and accelerate that? I look at a lot of the ways that AI is recommended, the way that it's been deployed, and I'm thinking of the different various platforms, and a lot of them are making their way over to Australia and crop up at the big tech conferences and things, and they do a lot of the same. They do more of the same but faster, helping students prepare for standardized tests and helping teachers churn out lesson plans en masse. So in that sense, I think it'll sort of accelerate whatever we already have in front of us, which is it's something that I would be worried about. But yeah, I would like to maybe think of some more of the positives. I don't know, I might throw over to Neil and see if he can think of any positives, but that's my biggest concern at the moment, I think. One of.
Yeah, I guess you guys have this all the time when you have discussions of AI, but clearly we need to be more specific about the types of AI we're talking about. One of the things that annoys me a lot is I'm trying to do research at the moment on teachers, how AI fits into teachers' work. And there are there's a whole variety, as you know, of different forms of AI that are of importance, but people only want to talk about Gen AI. So I agree with Leon that the values and the logics of whatever context you're putting the AI into may well be kind of amplified or exacerbated by the technology. So if you put AI into a school that's very much based around individualization and preparing people for the world of work, then those values will be kind of reflected in the way that the AI is used, as opposed to if you put an AI into community-based school that's very much around nurturing and care. So those values of the context will shape the way the AI is used. But AI is not neutral, it's not value-free. So it's interesting to think about the underlying inherent logics of the AI that we have at the moment. And it's important to think about that we can have other forms of AI are possible. The forms of AI we have at the moment are very much around precision and efficiency and speed and scaling up and measuring and monitoring and controlling and all the rest of it. And so those logics fit quite neatly into ways of schooling that are looking to try and be more efficient or more precise or more scaled up or more speedy. And so it's fitting into a set of logics that's very much based around making schools save time, be more efficient, do things quicker, do things at scale. Those are tech industry logics and AI logics that fit quite neatly with some industries and some domains of society. You could argue, perhaps not with education so much. Are we trying to school at scale? Can we be precise and efficient in everything we do? Is that what schools are actually about? It's about the values, I think, the values of the places that we're using the AI, but also the values of the technology itself. One of the things that's quite interesting are discussions now about how might we reimagine what AI is with different forms of value, with values of community or care or collectivity. But at the moment, I don't think there are particular AI tools around that are based around those values, because that's not where the industry is at the moment.
That's a really interesting and valuable take on this, because you, Neil, you're in Sweden right now, and you're researching the discourse about how Gen AI is discussed and in Sweden. Would you care to say something about that and your research, and then Leon will have his take on how people are talking about Gen AI in Australia?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks. Yeah, I'm in Lunds for 6 months. And actually, we've come here to do a research project on how teachers are using AI in their work. So most of the research is going into schools in Skåne and Småland, looking at how everyday teachers are making sense of and engaging with the tech. But as a little side project, I was really interested in the way that AI was being talked about in Sweden at a more national level. So there are two different discourses. There's the national discourse, and then there's a local discourse. And it's really interesting. I mean, people in Sweden, I'm sure most people on this call will realize that the Swedish federal government has had a pivot away from digitalization, is talking about moving back to, textbooks and paper, moving away from screens. And so there's a vacuum of people are just not talking at a national level about AI very much at all, and education, although AI and the rest of Sweden is kind of pushing ahead. So at the national level, people are quite concerned that schools are being left behind. I've learned that a big phrase in Sweden is getting on the train. Nearly everyone I've spoken to at national level has talked about, we need to get on the train. We're not getting on the train. We'll never get on the train. And I was like, why is everyone talking about getting on trains? But you can see where I'm coming at. There's a worry that Swedish education is missing out because they're not, the federal government's not taking a big hold on AI. And similarly, lots of the kind of agencies slightly below the federal government are kind of hamstrung. They can't do very much because A, they're not set up to really be proactive, but also they've got this cloud of federal government hanging over them. But on the other hand, as many of you guys know, municipalities and schools individually some of them are doing some great things with AI and really pushing forward and have some great initiatives, but there's lots that are not. And so seems to be a concern in Sweden, which I don't pick up in Australia so much, that there's going to be growing inequality, that the schools and the teachers and the municipalities that are not perhaps proactively pushing AI, those students are going to miss out, and we're going to see a gap between the AI power users and the schools which are not really making much use of AI. So there's that kind of social justice side of things that I think people are worried about over here. And the other thing that's quite interesting here is that GDPR really is a big issue, which I don't think it is in Australia. Australia is much more of the Wild West when it comes to data. But here, GDPR compliance is a big issue. And so we've seen municipalities buy Copilot and then have to get rid of Copilot. And there's a big concern. So GDPR seems to be a kind of a reason why people are not necessarily hooking on to AI. And just two other things very, very quickly. I get a sense now that the panic around cheating has subsided in schools. And I also get a sense that teachers are kind of moving on. It's settled down a bit. So the schools that we're in, a lot of the teachers, even if they're interested in Gen AI, they've got other things to be worrying about. The national testing was meant to be digitalized this year. So that was a big focus for people, and that went a bit wrong. There's a new curriculum, as you know. There's lots of other stuff dealing with, horrific things like, school violence. So when you talk to teachers, they go, yeah, I'm quite interested in Gen AI, but, I'll deal with it in the autumn. We've got a lot of other stuff to be worrying about.
Mm-hmm.
So my hunch is now that the hype has settled, most people are kind of quite chilled about it. They're not doing too much with it. And there's a few folk that are just doing lots and lots of stuff. So it's kind of settling down, but not in the way that AI has transformed Swedish schools. One more thing, I don't think any other country is doing it any better. So even though Swedish schools might not be getting on the train, I don't see any other countries where schools are necessarily leading the way. So everyone's kind of in the same boat, I think.
Is it so, Leon? How is it in Australia? What's the discussion about generative AI in schools, and what are people talking about?
I live in the country, so we don't even have a train. We've got 2 buses and then a train just to get into the city. My PhD research is around the discourses of secondary English teachers specifically. So I'm working with a pretty niche crowd who are interested in writing mostly, and I still a lot of those discourses around inevitability, which are problematic because, for me, there's a nuance between ubiquity and inevitability, which is something that I've written about recently. But the technology is arguably already everywhere. Okay, that's fine. We can say that. Every student's device has already got some kind of artificial intelligence shoved into it, whether it's the Gen AI type or the other type. And the students have fairly easy, ubiquitous access to stuff like ChatGPT, Copilot, whatever. But the line and that kind of discourse around, oh, it's inevitable, so therefore we must, or it's inevitable, so we better get on the train. I find that problematic because we don't know what the technology looks like in 5 years or 10 years. We don't know that the way that OpenAI posits their version of AI is the inevitable future. And when we look at the ways that schools buy into systems like Microsoft Copilot, or we're a Google school, so we're going to use Gemini, or we've just signed a big ChatGPT education deal like the universities in the US. That to me feels like more like compliant than anything else. And it's understandable, particularly for the schools. If you're a Microsoft school, then it's logical to keep it within that ecosystem, and they'll talk about your data being more private and all of that stuff. But I don't think that inevitable is the same as ubiquitous. I think that, yes, all right, maybe the technology is already everywhere, but that doesn't mean that we need to engage with it in the way that these technology companies are maybe suggesting that we engage. I do agree that that narrative around cheating has changed, and that some of that is, from my experience, is just that teachers they're sort of over it. They're sick of talking about that. Yes, all of the students are using it for absolutely everything. Big article in the New York Times or whatever it was yesterday saying all students are cheating their way through university. Yeah, okay, good. And I've got a few other things on my plate, so I'll talk about that later. When if I talk to schools now about AI, they're more interested in, okay, so how can I use it? What's it good for? What do I need to avoid? Yes, the students are using it for everything. Do you have any suggestions for dealing with that? No, I don't, and I don't think anybody else does. But at least we're acknowledging that this is, it's a problem, but it's not this like huge glaring barrier that all of a sudden education ground to a halt.
Right. But when I'm out lecturing, I'm talking about the accessibility with AI, that you can leverage your education and try to make it more accessible to students that have struggles with school, and you can use it as a helping tool. How do you view that in your research?
I work a lot with vocational education out here, and particularly where I live, a lot with agricultural studies providers. And so we're talking kids from kind of 15 up to adults doing vocational agricultural studies courses. And the teachers and the students in those courses, they understand a lot of those students are coming out of mainstream education, or they don't really fit with K-12 education in certain ways. And there are literacy and numeracy hoops to jump through in vocational education. But obviously they're spending much more of their time doing the practical work, doing, out in the fields, doing that kind of work. And they're much more interested in, okay, so what does, voice to text transcription look like, and how can that help my student pass these literacy outcomes? How can we'll get them using these kinds of technologies in ways that they can navigate their way through this system, because we know we've still got to play within the system that we're in. But ultimately, they're going to spend more time doing the more valuable work that they actually want to do. And that ultimately, when they do get their Cert 2, 3, or their diploma of agriculture or whatever, they're going to actually leave with some of those skills that are quite useful to them.
I want to jump back a little bit, because correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't in early 2023 when ChatGPT was like starting to get into schools, didn't Australia put a ban on using generative AI for like 6 months or something to come up with a strategy? Have I misinterpreted that, or like that they stopped and then had a strategy and then they went with it? Or is that just how I remember it? Do you guys understand what I'm saying? My English is not the best.
No, it's better than my Swedish. Well, Leon can probably talk this better than me, but as I remember it, the federal minister and Australian politicians love grand gestures. I think the initial discourse was, we are banning AI from schools. But what the federal minister says and what happens in the States are two completely different things. So it was a bit of hot air, really, I think, from the federal minister. But the fact that they said that did kind of chill the conversation quite a lot. You might be aware that at the moment they're trying to ban social media from all under 16s, which again is, I don't know quite what language I'm allowed to use in this podcast, but is kind of bullshit.
So you can use whatever language you want about
they tend to. So as far as I understand it, was it Jason Clare or whoever it was that was federal minister at the time did make a grand gesture that he was banning AI, as if you can ban AI. It's just a nonsense thing to say, but that was the initial statement, as I understood it anyway.
And I think what's important that came out of that was just fractured across states and sectors, because South Australia alone decided not to.
Okay.
They decided not to ban. It just, we're not gonna do that. We'll just carry on. Every other state's department banned. Independent schools didn't. Catholics just sort of did what they wanted. And now we've ended up in a state where, if you talk to schools, it definitely feels like teachers in the department schools are a little bit more sheltered. We still have in the Victorian government sector, there's a Victorian government edict, I believe, saying you cannot use any gov.au accounts to sign up to ChatGPT, which includes education.gov.au. So we're still seeing, that level of difference between the Victorian government schools, for example, and the New South Wales independent schools who've been running all of these conferences on AI, and their schools are, and New South Wales Department of Education is building its own chatbot built on top of GPT's API, and South Australia's built this chatbot supposedly with Microsoft, though nobody's ever actually seen it.
So it's a mosaic of different solutions to the same issue. Because my perception and the narrative that I thought was correct was that Australia took their time thinking to come up with a national strategy that was implemented all over Australia. So that's definitely not the case then. Or
we've got the Australian framework for generative AI in schools, which is a bit of a mouthful. which has 6 core principles and 20 something guiding statements. It's quite a brief little document.
Okay. So
the hard part is since then there hasn't been a lot of fleshing that out with anything practical. But I've seen recently Queensland Department of Education and the QCAA, the senior assessment authority, have started to put some webinars and things together, and some things around AI use, and each department has their own little bank of resources on their website, but it's very patchy. It's very, you would hope that putting together a national framework might do that. But honestly, we don't even follow our national curriculum in Australia. We have a national curriculum. Nobody uses it. Every state just does their own thing. So that's fairly typical.
And this is an interesting thing to relate to the Swedish context, because there's lots of people in Sweden saying we need a national framework, we need a national strategy, we need a national policy. As Leon says, we have that in Australia. The schools I'm working with in Australia have no idea what the national framework is. They'll talk about it and say, oh, there's a national framework, and that's almost enough. They can tick the box, but they've never read it and they don't know what it is. They're certainly not implementing it. So I think you really have to ask, what would a Swedish national framework or national policy look like, and how would it actually leverage kind of change in Swedish schools, particularly in the free school sector? I mean, as Leon says, I think it's 60% of schools in Australia are government schools, and then 40% are not, and so they do their own thing anyway. And it's the same in Sweden. So Australia can be an interesting kind of example. What would a national strategy in Sweden look like? And then we can look at what's going on in Estonia at the moment, and them signing up with is that what you want? But so I'm quite interested about what we think we want the Swedish government to do and what effect that would have, because as you know, lots of schools in Sweden also ignore what the federal government says.
Yeah, that we do, but I think that why some of us want a national strategy or some kind of framework is because some schools are not, it's the social equality aspect of it, because a lot of schools, or some schools at least, are not talking about it at all, and I still hear about examples where people are failing students because they see ChatGPT up on their browser and not talking about Gen AI. So the inequality, and that people might be using generative AI in a way that's harmful for learning, I think that's just like we want to push the discussion up on the agenda, and see that the politicians recognize that this is something important. And
even acknowledging that Gen AI is being used in schools, if a national agency were to acknowledge that would lead to discussions, and that discussion needs to happen with the students. So I think it's very important that we get this framework in place.
One thing
so I think in that respect, Australia can be a good example of how not to do it, because otherwise you'll get this bland statement with 6 bullet points and whatever else, and people will just ignore it. So I think you do need to think very specifically what you want the national government to do, and what outcomes you want from this, rather than just let's have a box to tick about Gen AI. Sorry, Leon, I cut in.
No, that's fine. I was just going to say that the one thing that it has done at least is give people permission to talk about it with students. Although that's, again, it's idealistic. Ideally, what it would do is give people permission to talk about it with students. And there is, there's points in there that say things like, educators in the teaching and learning principle, we've got a responsibility to talk to students about what appropriate use looks like and what it doesn't look like, which can theoretically put an end to those conversations where we go, oh, it's automatically cheating, so we're going to go and do everything under exam conditions, and all of a sudden we've stuffed it for 30% of our students who can't demonstrate what they've learned under exam conditions because anxious or ADHD or dyslexia or whatever stops them from doing that. And we've seen that the framework could theoretically say to schools, let's not do that, let's have a different conversation. But that's entirely reliant on people actually using it. And I alluded before to the national curriculum that we have, and ACARA, who's our curriculum authority, have published resources on artificial intelligence and where it connects with digital technologies and mathematics. And they're talking more broadly about AI and machine learning as well as just generative AI. They have these extensive documents, and they say, like, from foundation to year 10, you can talk about algorithms, you can talk about bias, you can talk about linear progression if you really want to, all of these points where you can talk about AI, nobody knows that that document exists. I have not met a single teacher who knows where to find that document, what it's called. It's called the AI Curriculum Connections document for anyone listening who's interested. But you know, this lack of communication, I think, is something that if you in Sweden, if you are going to go with a national framework or policy, like really think about how you're actually going to communicate that to the people on the ground that you're expecting to use it.
Yeah, because I want to pick up on that, because I think the lack of communication and lack of like frame, knowing what you can and should not do is like the question I hear all the time when talking to teachers, and especially talking to students, like how can we use AI? Because my experience is that most students don't want to cheat using generative AI. They understand that then copying the questions is cheating. But how can you tell me a bit about the AI assessment scale, Leon? Because it's such a wonderful framework for talking about how and when you can use AI in your learning. Well, how did the AI assessment come about, or what's the thinking about that?
I mean, it was a blog post. It was a blog post in conversation with the teaching and learning team at Edith Cowan University initially, and we were saying we can't just have use it or don't use it. There needs to be a little bit of nuance in the middle. And when Mike and Jasper at British Uni Vietnam and James Cook Uni, Jasper's at Durham Uni now in the UK, they picked it up and we kind of played around with it. And we have always intended it to help teachers to kind of just break down their types of assessments that they're already doing and say, well, where are the places where AI doesn't get in the way of what I'm trying to assess? So, you know, a good example of that, I hear a lot of people saying, oh, you know, I can't do like a research task anymore because the kids just go online and they type it into ChatGPT and it does all of the research for them. And I would look at that and say, okay, so what are the skills that you're trying to assess when you set this research task? Because if you're trying to assess, can the student form a Boolean search in Google or use a library database or conduct the research and write an annotated bibliography, you're probably not addressing the syllabus outcomes of year 10 health and PE. Like so if ChatGPT can do some of those research skills, but what you're actually assessing is their ability to interpret the research, then let them use the AI and teach them appropriate ways to do that. And, you know, we still have to fact check, particularly with generative AI systems, you know, increasingly different ways of doing that. But teach them some of those skills maybe, and then actually assess what they've learned rather than trying to assess, can they perform this research task? So that was where that came from. That was where those discussions have been heading for the last few years. And we've updated our language around that scale a few times, just as the technology keeps increasingly developing, as we know.
Yeah, I think it's just such a good framework that puts like the purpose of your teaching at the center, and I think that's one of the discussions that AI could lead to, and I hope that it leads to. But what other discussions about AI and schools do we need to have that we are not currently having at a higher level? Can you think of something?
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the way that teachers are using AI in their work. So not how students are using AI in the classroom, but how teachers are using it in terms of, lesson preparation, grading, feedback, everything else. And as you know, there's lots of different ways that you can use, particularly generative AI, to do some of these tasks. And again, it's a little bit like the Wild West. It's not really talked about. It's certainly not regulated. Schools are not really talking about it. Teachers are not necessarily talking with each other. So there's certainly a need for a conversation in the profession around this. And one of the things that we're finding is that actually using generative AI in your work involves doing a lot of work. It doesn't necessarily save you a lot of effort. There's a lot of professional expertise and pedagogical judgment and social nuance that needs to go into any use of Gen AI. And to be honest, I've not met many teachers that think they can press a button and all their work will be done from them with Gen AI. But there is a kind of discourse amongst the industry and perhaps amongst some people outside of schools that that's what the technology to do. So really kind of having a more realistic idea about what it means to work with Gen AI as a teacher, I think is super important. And also the professional and pedagogical skills you need if you're going to be doing that. We're talking to a lot of teachers now, and I can talk about this later on about what we're finding. Their big concern is, well, I'm a professional. I've been doing this for 7-10 years. I understand what it is to have a lesson plan or to grade work. And I can kind of work with Gen AI in those ways that allows me to have a new teacher coming straight out of school into kind of teaching teacher education. Won't necessarily, so there's a worry that new teachers will just suddenly think, oh, I can press a button on Magic School AI and it will do my grading for me, which I think is a worry. So we certainly need to be talking about that. It's not just about how kids are writing essays or assignments in the classroom. It's about how you use it as a professional. That's definitely one thing. I can think of many others, but that's probably the most pressing thing for school teachers anyway.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of my focus at the moment is on the role of subject matter experts, which almost makes you kind of sound like an anachronism in these conversations to say, actually, subject matter expertise and disciplinary expertise is way more important than these, sort of esoteric, abstract, future-focused thinking skills or whatever we want to call them. I want to know, like, what does this technology mean for the skilled English teacher? What does it mean for the skilled maths teacher? It's really different for each one as well. It's like this technology in the hands of a really skilled mathematics teacher is very different to what this technology looks like in the hands of a skilled English teacher. And for me, you just we've sort of lost sight of that, and that kind of the technology layer over the top, which says hit this button and we're going to generate a lesson plan, completely tips that whole idea. It's deprofessionalizing, and we have instances in Australia, which, call them whatever you want, like education knowledge brokers and big think tanks and all of these organizations that also follow those lines, where they say, well, what teachers want is to reduce their workload. So what we will give you is some curriculum aligned worksheets. We know the same thing happens in the UK. We've got it over here. It's in the US. I don't know if you have that in Sweden as well. And now they are looking at AI and saying, and look, maybe we can incorporate AI. And you just think, okay, how about instead of doing that, we go to the people who spent 3, 4, 5 years at university learning a discipline and then did an education qualification and then spent a few years in the classroom. And let's ask them how they might use this technology. That's way more interesting than anything else that I'm hearing.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more, because if you do, we just finished our Copilot 365 pilots to see if we should implement that in our municipality, and what they ask about in the end is how much time have you saved with Copilot, and I don't care nothing about that. And I think Danny and Jonathan would agree, it's when you have domain expertise and when you are passionate about some things, that's when ChatGPT is your best friend and will get you the most job work out. So what are your biggest hopes for generative AI and schools? What are, if everything goes right, what could this lead to? And take height for that the technology will evolve quite rapidly, but what are your hopes for schools and AI? Anyone?
Firstly, I'm not positive, so let Leon be positive.
I desperately try to cling to both sides of the positive and the negative, and I always slip off into the negative side. It's way too easy. But look, if I'm looking optimistically, I've been in a bunch of schools this term already. We're in week 3 of the Australian term, and I have seen teachers already doing really interesting and incredible things once they get their hands on technology that actually works. And we have rich conversations about all of the critical stuff. I'll talk to the arts teachers about some of those problems with AI image generation, and then they'll show me how they're using it, and they're using Adobe Firefly, and they're drawing sketches and using them as composition references, and then turning them into prototypes, and then taking that to the classroom and using that for some mixed media work. And that, again, coming back to the professional expertise, but they are leaning into that expertise, and then they're bouncing backwards and forwards with the technology in a way which is it feels really natural, and it feels really interesting. And I've seen that with vet music teachers and creative arts, visual arts teachers. I've seen English teachers doing science fiction world building activities that they're plotting out, and drawing on different technologies. So I am seeing like sparks of really interesting creative stuff from the teacher community. In order to facilitate that, obviously, it always comes back to time and money. Time and money. We need more time and more money. We need more teachers in classrooms, because we don't have many of those in Australia, apparently. But if we can resource that kind of thing, I would be optimistic.
And you're not.
Well, yeah, I think in reality, I mean, I'm not sure the technology is evolving rapidly. You're seeing more people kind of say, well, Gen AI's kind of hit its limits at the moment, and it's not getting much better. If anything, it's getting worse. There was that article by Tracy McMillan-Cottom, I think in New York Times, it was referring to Gen AI as a mid-technology, or a mere technology, or mediocre. It does stuff in a mediocre manner, but is it getting much better? I'm not sure. I think in reality it's being baked into the systems that we use. So the idea of logging on to ChatGPT and prompting it might be a thing of the past in a year or two's time. It will just be in the background of most things that we do, and that's a danger in itself, because I think teachers and students need to be aware when AI is assisting them in the background and when it's not. If I'm being positive, I would love to think of ways that we could reinvent AI for education. So what would a generative AI tool that was genuinely developed, as Leon said, by expert teachers or even by students look like? And that's where you might want to think about other forms of generative AI that are based around logics of social inequality, for example, or care or support or whatever it is. But I don't think we have those tools at the moment. And in a really idealistic manner, I still look back to when Gary Kasparov was talking about playing Deep Blue. And he said at one point that it made a move that no human would ever think of doing. And it just blew his mind. And I'd love to think what AI could do that would blow our minds about education. At the moment, it's doing stuff that we're already doing. We don't need AI to produce lesson plans. People can produce lesson plans. They can mark work. They can write essays. What could AI do that's genuinely different, that's genuinely completely out there? And I think more and more the education tech industry is all just trying to do the same old stuff with this new technology. Why don't we challenge them to do completely different stuff? That's innovative. I don't know what it is, otherwise I wouldn't be here talking to you guys. I'd be making money. But
yeah. Wow. Yeah. So the follow-up question would obviously be, what's your biggest fears? Like, what if we maybe continue the same path, or if things worsens? What's the biggest fears for this development and learning in schools?
Look at what's going on in the US. So it's interesting. I think there was a few debates going on recently about, oh, no one's ever said that AI is going to replace teachers. It's all, and I like Chris Gilliard, who kind of blogs under the name Hypervisible, always says that no one says that AI is going to replace workers until they do. And so in the US at the moment, we're already seeing Elon Musk say that 38.5 million US teachers are inefficient. AI could replace them if possible. Look at what's going on with the gutting of public education in the States under Doge, how AI is being brought in there to take over from teachers. I think we could see a similar kind of hollowing out of public education systems if we had a government that wanted to do it, and we had school leaders that wanted to do it, and businesses that wanted to do it. But I think my greatest fear is that we will see a two-tier system. We'll see a mass education system for most people that's pretty much automated. It's pretty much personalized. It's very much based around tech, delivering things. And then you'll have an elite, old-fashioned education where you have a real teacher doing real things in a real classroom. And if the politics support that, that's easily what could happen. It's not that technology won't replace teachers. It could replace teachers. The question is whether it should replace teachers. And I think in Sweden, you've got a government at the moment that's tipping kind of one way. You can imagine how the politics could change here a bit more, and then all of a sudden you'll be in the same boat as the US. So it's not so much about the tech, it's about how the tech is used and what intentions it's used for. And you can see a scenario where it's not used to support creativity or social inequality or care. It's used to support de-skilling, hollowing out of education, mass provision, mass efficiencies, and real diminishing of what schools are. They're places where people get together to do things together, to become people together.
Får jag ställa en fråga då?
Ja.
Det är antagligen väldigt många, I was speaking Swedish now, wait a minute. I just have to press the English button. And I'm English as well. Now I was wondering if you could help. There are a lot of teachers probably going to watch this podcast who some of them are using generative AI in the classroom, but most of them don't really know where to start. And I wondered if you could not tell them which apps to use, but give them some way of thinking. Should they start? Should they take it easy and wait till someone else does it? Or what advice have you got for teachers now that are wondering what the bloody hell's going on and what they should do now? If I take Leon first then, and then Neil can have a go.
I always encourage people to have a bit of a play around with what's out there and what's really obvious. So we know that ChatGPT and Google Gemini and these ones, they're the biggest models that are available. They are the ostensibly most powerful, capable models that are out there. They're always going to be the ones that have got the money to release the newest frontier models. Don't get bogged down with all of these third-party applications and the anybody that uses the word magic anywhere, sparkly emojis, anyone that's got something.ai as their domain address. look for a .com at least. Not because we want to just kind of kowtow to the biggest of the big tech companies, but because realistically you're probably going to get the most realistic user experience by just going to one of those big models and find out what it can do. And then the way that I tell people to find out what it can do is just ask a few questions backwards and forwards based on whatever your own domain expertise is in whatever industry. That's a really good way to spot where it starts to just fabricate information and wobble off course. But it's also a good way of saying, okay, maybe this stuff in some areas is more capable than I thought. Maybe in some areas, like Neil said, it's a little bit mid. The only way that you can come to those conclusions, though, is actually by trying it out for yourself. Like, don't rely on third-hand information. Hype in both directions: the really negative, critical hype, the ex-doom cry, whatever that is, and the really positive hype on the other side. Just find your own way through and learn about the technologies that way.
Yep.
Yeah, I would always say to teachers with any tech that you just need to talk to your colleagues and talk to other teachers in the similar context to you, because what works will be very locally, contextually driven. What works in a classroom in Stockholm is different to what works in a classroom in Småland, free school. Just talk to your local colleagues, ask them what they're doing, and make it more of a conversation. At the moment, it's almost a bit like a kind of little private dirty secret that people are doing things and don't want to talk to other people about it. Just talk to other people in your school, in your municipality, about what they're doing and see what flicks. And the other thing I'd say is we're talking to lots of teachers here, and they're making the very good point that when they use generative AI as a teacher, they do it in a very different way. Someone referred to it, I have to be very picky, I have to be very skeptical, I have to be very risk averse. So my advice might be start using something like ChatGPT in your real life. Use it to write a shopping list or a recipe. Get used to the technology in some completely kind of boring, mundane way. And then once you get comfortable with it, then try and think about how you can translate it to your teaching work. So personally, I use it very, very rarely, if at all. So there is an argument that not everyone has to use it. But if you're interested, I would definitely use those two lines of just getting, have a play around with it outside of education.
And this time next year, we might be able to do the shopping list, press the magic button, and someone knocks on the door with 2 bags of shopping. Yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's ever going to happen. I don't think even Gen AI is capable of doing that. And the whole agents thing's fascinating, because if you look at how they can't even do that. Anyway, without buying.
Yeah, I haven't seen any amazing agents yet. I wonder. That's really good advice for teachers. What about the kids then? Because most people aren't really talking about it with the students, not in Sweden anyway. Should we do it? Should we wait with it? What should we say to the kids? Should we teach them about AI, how to use it, what it is, that kind of stuff? What do you think about that? Whoever feels like talking, go for it.
Oh, I was just going to say that Google have just kicked a nice large hornet's nest with this one, haven't they? I've just, as a parent, I've got 3 kids, and none of them are old enough to use AI, although I'm sure they've probably encountered it already. But I just received an email the other day as a parent from Google saying, congratulations, Google Gemini is now available for kids. Here are all of the responsibilities that you have as a parent to make sure that our technology doesn't traumatize your child. And I think one thing we've got to be conscious of is that kids are encountering and are using these technologies, whether we want them to or not, such as it was with social media, and technologies since time immemorial. But with social media, it took us nearly a decade to realize how bad social media was for kids, for people's mental health, for addictive, for dark algorithms, all of that stuff. These technologies, these AI technologies, the companies that build these technologies are the social media companies. Sam Altman, venture capitalist, Instagram, or whatever it was that Y Combinator funded. Elon Musk, X, all of those things, Meta, obviously, all of these companies, they are the same companies. It shouldn't take us 10 years to realize that they're going to, potentially do some harm. So kids need support. They're already using the technology. We've got to be really transparent about those conversations and not wait for Google to email us to tell us what to do.
What does that support look like then?
I think it starts with conversations. I think in order to do that, we all need to know what we're talking about a little bit more. But my kids have seen me using stuff, obviously, with the work that I do, and they're interested, particularly if I'm using image generation. But there are ways to talk to young children about what these technologies are and how they work, and that doesn't necessarily mean putting it in their hands. There's a certain amount of responsibility that we have there as well.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. AI literacy, there's 101 different flavors of AI literacy. So I think we need to get away from the idea that we can somehow teach kids to have AI skills that will give them amazing jobs for the future. We've seen that with coding, the push for coding over the last 10 years, the idea that everyone was going to get amazing programming jobs. At very best, where coding did kind of bite, it's just preparing kids for very low paid, low skilled jobs in the tech industry, which isn't really what schools should be about. But AI literacy, we can use the term because it's being used a lot as a way of thinking about what we actually want schools to be for. And if we circle back to the very beginning where you asked us what schools were for, about becoming part of a community, about becoming a person, about being able to do things. I like the idea of AI literacy in terms of, first of all, having a basic understanding of what AI is and how AI works. That doesn't mean to say you have to be a computer science expert, but the basic logics of how, if you understand the basic logics of how something like ChatGPT works, you then have an understanding about why hallucinations occur or the data sets it's trained on and the limitations. So a kind of basic understanding, I think, is really important. But then really important is an awareness, or foster a capacity to be aware where AI is present. And the idea, as I said, of logging on to an AI tool and using it, most AI is in the background. It's used on us, not used by us. So you need to be aware where there are AI systems that are making decisions or monitoring, or there are all sorts of other things. So an awareness of AI, and then fostering the ability to work with AI, work around AI, and then also work against AI. And I think those are skills which in the next few decades are going to be super important. If I'm in a classroom that's being completely algorithmically controlled, I want to be aware of it. I want to be able to work with it to my advantage, but I also want to work around it or perhaps work against it. So those forms of critical literacies, I think, are really interesting to think about what we could be doing in schools, because Google are not going to give that to kids. And all kids are not necessarily going to get that outside of schools. So schools are a really important part for a more kind of democratic engagement with this technology. The technology is not going away. I don't think Gen AI is necessarily going to be around in the form it is for much longer, but AI in itself is going to be around in our lives in myriad different ways. So we need to get kids and adults well prepared to thrive in that sort of society.
Yeah, Brilliant. Thanks for the brilliant answers. I think Joel is going to wrap it up now.
Wrap it up. Yeah, I don't know how to wrap this up because it's been such a fascinating and inspiring and educational talk with you guys. You're brilliant people. You don't need ChatGPT to be that, but it's been amazing. And I think that how should I wrap this up? But I take so many things with me from this conversation, mostly things about that we still need to foster critical thinking, that the use of Gen AI is at its most valuable when you have study strategies and when you have a drive for doing things. And it's been such a great conversation, and thank you so much for wanting to be here with us at AI-snack, which is the name of the podcast. And Jonathan, do you want to say some last words as well?
No, I just want to thank you all for coming. And I want to say that I think Danny made a point in an earlier episode that when he said that AI is an amplifying technology, that when you're really good at something, you can just use AI to leverage that, but it requires you to be good at it from the beginning. You can't use AI to become good at something.
Yeah. Did I say something like that? I'm impressed.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Tack så mycket.
Tack så mycket.